Hey everybody, hope everyone's doing well. So I did my lit review on youth sports and what youth sports nowadays are teaching our youth about the ethics in sport. I picked this because obviously I am a PE teacher. I deal with sports a lot. I teach sports a lot. We have a lot of youth programs. I deal with a lot of youth programs, and I just really wanted to dive into what these youth sports are teaching our kids today. And the research was really interesting. What I found is that 70% of kids who are in youth sports quit before they get to a varsity sport, and 70% is quite the percentage to not be in sports anymore. And this doesn't represent every demographic equally. I mean, local sports probably have or rural sports tend to have a higher rate of keeping out. But I got to thinking. Most of our 7th grade teams, 8th grade teams, they have about 12 to 14 kids on them. And this past year, we graduated 4. So right there, you are looking at, most of those kids, a good chunk, probably about 70% of those kids, don't go out for sports anymore. Which I think is, like I said, that's interesting. So I wanted to look into what is causing that rate and what is making the ethics of sport change from when they're in youth sports to varsity sports, and what kind of impacts we have. And the first couple things I looked at were parents and coaches. Coach Stig, who's the coach of SDSU, South Dakota State University, I had him speak to my coaching class, and his quote was that the most biased monster out there is the parent. And it's absolutely true. The parents want the best for their kids. It's not a bad thing, but when it does come to be an issue, is that they think their kid should have the best experience out of anybody, and it's not always the case, and parents get upset about that, and then their kids see that the parents are upset. The kids see how the parents react, and they react a similar way, or they react the same way. We learn a lot of our developmental characteristics from our parents, and so that's one issue that comes up when we think of the ethics in sport now. Is the kids? A lot of these kids get it from their parents, who are either A, living vicariously through the kids, and B, they see what to do from the parents. The next one is coaches, and this is a huge issue that we see. A lot of coaches that are coaching youth sports nowadays are unqualified. They coach simply because there was an opening, simply because the coach or the team needed a coach, and this can be an issue because that coach, he's unqualified. He doesn't know the fundamentals. He doesn't know the ethics of sport. He doesn't know how to get kids out for the next year of that sport, and that's a big issue. The next one we look at is sport specialization, and what that does to our ethics. And a lot of times we see these kids go out for one sport, and they think that if they only do one sport, they'll be good at that sport, and they don't participate in anything else. They don't do anything else, and this becomes an issue in our ethics because we don't see sports as equal, and then we get into fights, we get into arguments with our classmates, with people, and we ruin the integrity of sport because we think one is better than the other. And in reality, you really can't compare sports because it's apples and oranges. It's different things. It's things that just don't compare well to each other. So it's tough for those kids to get an accurate ethical belief in sports they don't play because they don't play them. And they're really specialized only to that one sport. And those are just a couple of issues. There's a lot of ethical issues as far as opportunity goes. We've always seen the specific AAU teams where, you have to have a certain amount of money to be on this team, or parents have more money, or certain parents have more money, and they're able to pay for more opportunity for their kid in sport than someone who doesn't have as much money. And that's an ethical issue that we see where kids can get the idea that just sports are unfair. In a lot of cases, it is unfair, but it's not unjust, I would say. So that's what I looked at in my ethical lit review. What I found is that parents, coaches, we all got to be on the same page. We got to realize what youth sports, or we got to see the purpose in youth sports. And one of my assistant coaches, or fellow assistant coaches, really spoke the words to me that really resonated with me. Is that the goal of youth sports is to learn the fundamentals and get them to come out for next year. And that's really something that I think coaches need to realize is that youth sports is not about winning. Youth sports is not about records, championships, anything like that. It's about learning the fundamentals, learning the game, and coming out the next year so that they can continue to develop, continue to be better for the sport, improve overall, and improve the sport. Now, there weren't a whole lot of solutions that I found as far as equal opportunity goes. I mean, it's an unfair world. We're never going to have the same opportunities as someone who has more money or less money. It's going to be different. And there's not a whole lot of solutions to that, but I really enjoyed looking into this, and I think that youth sports do play a huge role in how we play the game. And I can think of specific examples in my own youth sports career where I learned a lot of different things. I had a lot of good coaches in my time, and I thought that was useful. I remember how they used players. I remember how they encouraged players. I remember how they didn't encourage players, and a lot of that impacts the ethics of our kids today in the sports that they play. So those are just a few things that I looked at in my lit review, and I'd be curious to see what you guys thought of youth sports. I mean, obviously there's tons and tons of benefits to youth sports, and it doesn't end with just being active. You're talking about learning social skills, learning developmental skills, learning different things about playing with other kids and learning how to deal with that, learning to deal with failures, learning to deal with successes. I mean, there's so many benefits to youth sports, but the question I was looking at is how are they affecting ethics today? How are we, as coaches, parents, how are we teaching those ethics to these youth kids, to these youth athletes? So that's the question that I'll pose to you is how do you think that youth sports affect ethics today?